All righty then. Hello, hello. It is 1 p.m. ET. We are Reflect, Recalibrate. Welcome, welcome. We are your lovely lady artivist host. I am Janet E. Dandridge, my lovely lady artivist co-host, Danny Snyder. I'm sorry, I'm about to call you Janet. This is part This is part one of the Fabric and Crowns collection. We'll be discussing how textiles and African hair braiding are acts of activism and play significant roles in social movements. All right, so let's get it cracking.
I
So,
don't know if that's a good idea to do a podcast where I'm you for a day and you're me for a day. I don't know if that's a good idea.
that would be interesting though.
Definitely not for this. When we're talking about hair, no way. No way. No
Would it
way.
be controversial? Would it be
Oh yeah.
controversial? Is
Oh
is that
yeah.
the is that what's happening? It would be controversial. I get it. I got it. I got it. I got it.
We don't need to be, I don't need to be explaining why I should have braids. Like, no, that's not gonna happen ever.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah,
So
this is an interesting podcast. I'll be honest, I don't know like anything about textiles or yoga or braiding or the things that we're going to be focusing on. Like these are things I really don't know anything about. Definitely not an expert in this series, that's for sure.
I know nothing about nothing. I look, I don't know too much about the yogi world
Hmm.
and really about the textile world, but this is, what we do here. We learn,
Right.
right? We share, we understand, we talk. And so we can talk through what we don't know because then when we have our special guests in part two, our special guest in part two of the Fabric and Crowns collection, we can ask them, right? And so
Right.
hopefully with their wisdom, they can guide us.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions. I mean, I guess for every guest I have a lot of questions, but I have a lot of questions like why do these things? Like not necessarily yoga, but like for example, braiding trees. Like why do that? Why decorate trees? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Using yarn on
Yeah.
trees is I think it's, you know, man, it's beautiful, first of all. So
Hmm.
the aesthetic pleasure of looking at not only a beautiful tree, but a beautiful tree decorated in a
Hmm.
way, in a loving way that represents how we can connect with trees, I think is one reason why, but I'm not sure. And I know folks are probably like, what are y'all talking about? Yarn on trees. And so
Yeah, it's a
our
thing.
special guest, yeah, it's a thing. Our special guest, Nawili G, in the next episode in part two, she does that. She adorns trees with yarn. And so we'll be getting into that. We'll be talking more about that. And what we can do also is put in the show notes. A link to her Instagram so you all can check her out
Hmm.
and maybe have some questions prepared for part
Hmm.
two. But right now in part one, just as far as what I'm thinking, that's what it feels like to me. I've seen yarn bombing, that's a thing, right? An art thing. And I started seeing that in LA first. I didn't see that. Yeah, I saw that in
Hmm.
LA first. And I
Hmm.
was like, people are yarn bombing like their bikes
Hmm. Hmm.
and, trees
Hmm.
and all other types of natural and synthetic objects. And it just changes. I don't know how you feel about that object. It changes how you connect to that object, especially if
Hmm.
you're doing it, that process, that timely process
Hmm.
to create this sort of work where you're interacting with something natural or an object that like a cup that
Yeah.
you use on a regular basis, that you would then yarn. And so the next time you use that cup, hopefully you don't get the yarn pieces in your mouth. But it's like this warming feeling. So
Yeah.
and before we continue, actually, I put in the chat, how have you seen braiding, textiles, and or yoga used in activism?
Mm.
So,
Yeah, ask them first.
um, yeah, yeah. So y'all can, answer that question in the chat. But yeah, how do you feel about?
Well, I think It's beautiful. Like I always see it at festivals. I don't really see it in other places. I'm trying to think if I've seen like tree braiding and decorating bikes and cups and things like that in other places, but I feel like it's only in festivals where I've seen it. And it's cool and it's fun. It makes everything different. And you're right, you have a new connection with those objects. And the experience is very meditative because it's a long, repetitive action. And it can be a social action too. Like, I am not a knitter, but that's one thing what's the word I'm looking for? I'm a little envious of, I guess, even of like my mom and how she's a knitter and it's
Mhm.
socially acceptable to knit in any kind of public space because I'm a person who's fidgety and I need things to fidget with. I'm always actually
Mhm.
sitting here playing with the clip on my headphones
Mhm.
while we're doing our podcasts. And so I like this idea of knitting, but also it's a social thing. Like I like how she can get together with a bunch of women or men or whoever, and they can knit and hang out and just talk and knit while they're
Yeah,
talking. And because for me, I can only sit and talk for so long. I need to get up and I need to move around. I need to make something. That's so I think it's cool when you go to festivals and you see people in these circles and maybe it's a very quiet circle. They're just sitting together and doing it, but then maybe they're social. So I think it can be meditative and it can be social.
yeah,
But yeah, the it's cool like when like, hey, my hair now can match my bike and my cup, but it's still like why? Like I'm very curious to ask this question of why, especially in the realm of activism. There might be a why I don't really realize, right?
yeah. What does activism mean in the context, in the histories of braiding, textiles, and yoga? What does that mean? Well, one of the first examples that came up in just surfing the web is the World Afro Day.
Hmm. Hmm.
And on this site, it's called the Black Curriculum. And this was from the World Afro Day 2022. And how we got here was I was thinking about a photographer who creates these beautiful black and white images of African braiding, African hairstyles. Um, and what it says on this site, the Black Curriculum, is two artists. I was thinking about one artist, but then I saw another artist on here, and I was just like, oh, okay, cool. Let me check this person out. So, funny enough, my nickname is JD, and so this person's name is JD. Okay, Ojikeri. I'm probably saying this wrong. But this person is regarded as one of the greatest African photographers of the 20th century. Beginning in the 1950s, he produced an impressive portfolio of 2,000 negatives documenting the ways women styled their hair into monumental headdresses. Like, that's a beautiful phrase, monumental headdresses. Yeah. On O.J. Carey's death, he left behind an archive of well over 10,000 photographs of his home country, Nigeria. And so when you research this photographer, when you see how he created these photographs, this documentation, which I think is activism in itself, because then you are making sure that we know the history and that is passed on. You're looking at how these hairstyles signify beauty, honor,
Hmm.
trust, love, self-love, respect. All of these words come to mind while looking at these hairstyles. And then personally, as a person who's worn um, so many different types of African hair braiding styles, you just feel like your crown is reaching up into the cosmos and you're connecting with okay, one moment, okay. You're connecting with the cosmos and your ancestors and your descendants,
Hmm.
because this is something that is of your origin. This is something
Hmm.
that is of your history. And then you think about how hair was used within the United States of America. For me, you think about how it was used to create messages, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
to,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that first comes to my head is transporting seeds, for
Yeah.
planting.
Yeah.
It's 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 such a beautiful and significant method, our art creation, that just holds so much weight in how we see ourselves as Black folks, and how we utilize what we have to get what we need.
Mm-hmm. 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 It's everything. It can really represent everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. 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 It's I just want to say I'm a working mama, and
Mm-hmm.
my child is coming over to me while I'm trying to give this podcast, and he's asking me for a variety of things. And so it's just funny because I'm like, I'm trying to keep my mind right and trying to keep the conversation going
Right. Yeah, no, and
and keep the thought process.
I'm kind of distracted too right now because I'm in my big girl job work office, which is weird for me. I'm not at my home office. So I'm also a little distracted by how my internet sucks in this office. And yeah, and I literally was racing to get here on time. So we're both a little like, ah, like we're a little afraid, you could say, to to play on the
But we're
pun
doing
of
it though.
yarn. We're doing it.
We're
That's
doing
what
it
the
though.
show must go on.
And I'm those of
Hey,
you who are
maybe.
watching on YouTube, y'all can see what's happening. And I'm going to mute
Hmm.
myself while Danny talks
Yeah.
about some things while I deal with my child.
Right. I was actually going to say, I hope what you're doing is putting on PBS for him. I know he was watching it earlier, and we just like to let PBS know that while we're here, we would love to be on PBS too. We're all about PBS. I know Trump is not so much about PBS right now, but we're going to make it happen. We're going to bring this kind of material and content to PBS one day. That is the goal. So yeah, I'm very curious how people are in the chat, maybe now in the future, thinking about how textiles and yoga and braiding can be connected with activism. I think like the braiding and afro hair just seems kind of like an obvious one to me. The one that's like least obvious to me is yoga. I'm like, oh, how have I seen yoga in activism? And honestly, I can't think of any personal examples. And one thing I would love for audiences to share with us is I have experience in restorative justice. And in my brain, I'm like, oh, I can totally see how meditation and yoga can be used in restorative circles and healing circles. But I've not witnessed this. And I would love for people to share examples with us. If you have one, please let us know, because this is something I personally would like to learn more about. Yoga is something I've tried. I literally, I told this to Jana. I was like, the times I've tried yoga, I've literally farted and fell asleep. Like I just couldn't, like it's not for me. Meditation is for me. I do like meditating. I like walking meditation especially. But yeah, I would like to see how I could potentially use yoga in a restorative circle and a healing circle. And I've used drums in healing circles, so I can see how that works. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, yoga could be very similar to drumming circles, but I've not really seen it that very much in activism though, just in the process of restoring community peace. So I'm not, yeah, do you have any
Well, yeah,
ideas?
what you're saying though with the drumming circles and what you brought up earlier, just healing circles, right? In general,
Hmm.
I've seen people actually be in yoga positions, like, the way they're
Hmm.
sitting,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
maybe it's not consciously doing yoga, but they are utilizing yoga positions while listening to the drumming, or,
Hmm.
in the park while uh, participating in a protest.
Hmm.
I've seen that for sure. Actively, consciously doing yoga. Um, as part of activism, making those connect. No, I actually haven't heard anyone say anything about that, but I think it's sort of the thing where when people come into healing circles and you think about how healing is activism, healing is um something that is necessary when we think about activism because you do all of the work, right? And you have all of this trauma, all of this energy to create justice, right? Or share what you feel is right. You need that healing. And that's the line that I create between the two. Having that self-care that's necessary after you are actively like marching for a day,
Right,
right?
right.
And I know and I've heard and I've seen like you were just saying, I believe, where these types of healing practices are offered to people when they participate in something that we know is going to produce sadness or is basically something we're dealing with because of how horrific it is and trying to change something. So yoga to me, that's the line, that's the connection. So when I think of, for example, Nawili G, who we're going to be talking to, who I've known for a while, and I know I still have to learn a lot. Like some things that I'm just learning about accomplishments of Nawili's, and I'm just like, wow. When she talks about it, if to me it feels like that's the line of, this is how I am of service to the world. This is how I
Mm-hmm.
am of service to my community. I provide
Mm-hmm.
this healing art practice
Mm-hmm.
um, as part of my activism. I don't know if she'll say it like that, but for me, that's sort of, the line. And actually, Nawili is on with us, and I just want to share what she said.
Oh, she's actually
She
watching. Yay!
she's on with us, and she said, breathing in tandem with groups and individually brings into alignment the whole person. Yes,
Mm.
right? That connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you
Mm-hmm.
think a protest, right? It's about the collective energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
activism. That's an
Mm-hmm.
element of activism. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, we're on that right path, I
Ooh.
think, and thinking about it like that.
Sorry, I started thinking about like, when you're chanting, you're breathing together now too. When you're doing chants, right? When you're marching.
Mhm.
I hadn't really thought
Mhm.
about that before, that breath, and even adding a breath on purpose within a chant. Ooh, ideas.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. Especially in time with
mm.
music and with drumming and because of course any protest I've been in, I made sure there were drums, right? So, um, yeah.
Keep the
Oh,
funky drama drumming.
and now I'm thinking like Miles Davis, it's not the notes you play, it's the space between the notes. Like, what if you had this protest where there was purposely silence and just breath, and then back to chanting and music, which are also silent protests, of course, right? So, oh,
Yo,
interesting. Yeah, all of these
yo.
ideas. Mm.
Yeah, look, I'm thinking of, okay, I just thought about Avatar, the movie, and the
Avatar.
scene where
Okay.
they're around the tree of life,
Oh,
right? Like the trees, and they're doing that movement in circular movement, right? And their like legs are crossed, right? And they're
it's
holding, like
powerful.
they're touching each other. Yo,
Yeah.
let me
Okay.
find out.
So there's one thing we got from Avatar. Okay, one thing we got from that movie and
That's one
experience.
thing. That's one thing we got from Avatar.
Yeah.
That's one
Okay.
thing.
Okay. Yeah. It is a powerful moment in that movie. Yeah. Yes. I have to admit my mom's a little obsessed with the Avatar movies and so I've seen them many times. I was gonna say and Harry Potter, but I don't know where I'm gonna go with Harry Potter. Yeah, Avatar and Harry Potter I've seen too many times. Uh, so okay, this is something I'm curious to learn about is how I can try to incorporate more yoga practices. Definitely need to get the right yoga people involved because I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to yoga. I barely know how to breathe, I'm not gonna lie. I love meditating, but okay, let me put this way too. Just as a random side note about Danny, because this is authentic, safe space. I I do like meditating, but I will say I often cry when I meditate. Like I would say 9 times out of 10 when I meditate, I cry because I have so much built up and then I'm finally letting it release. So sometimes that's why I don't want to meditate because I'm like, I know I'm going to cry if I do. So this is an interesting
Oh,
idea too, because
wow.
it's like you're talking about with protests, having this time maybe during March or after where people can sit in a circle and breathe and cry. It's really important
Breathe
to
and
finally
cry.
let it go.
Okay, that leads me to sitting on the stoop. And I'm using that as the generalization of when you're getting your hair braided,
Mm,
sitting on the stoop of the house or of the apartment building, wherever you are, and getting your hair braided, and your folks are sitting around and you're talking about life, as they say, shooting the SHIT, right? Like you're talking about what's going on. And in the process, you are braiding someone's hair. So your energy is being transferred, right? You're exchanging
hmm
energy,
hmm
deep connection, direct connection, while exchanging energy with the extension, with people that are around you while the hair is being braided. And it feels so good. It feels so good. It feels so good because now I'm thinking about, going to the barbershop and having the
hmm
conversations while the hair is getting cut in the barbershop. Or sometimes you have braiders in barbershops, and you're having that conversation and you're creating that collective respite, that catharsis through
hmm
hair braiding, right? Through your crown, right? Because we're including, getting haircuts, braiding, um, you know, just think about when little kids are braiding each other's hair, just on the playground. It's just like, oh, I'm just gonna braid your hair.
hmm
And it's
hmm
like this lovely, fun moment between
hmm
children, and they're talking, the connection that can be made, right? Um, through this practice. We don't ever know where these conversations are going to go, right? And so it's funny how obviously there's always these connections, this universal connection
Yeah.
to these different topics. And again, well, I don't know if I said this already, but this is the first time we have spoken with a textile
hmm
yogi master braider,
hmm
on the show, that we're going to be speaking with her. And I just love the fact that we're exploring it from this angle, right?
hmm hmm
Because you don't immediately make that connection between the two. You don't immediately, or the
Mm-mm.
three. You don't
Mm-mm.
immediately make the
Mm-mm.
connection, like with yoga. What I say? Oh, yes, yoga. um and maybe definitely with braiding, definitely with textile, but yoga, you don't immediately make the connection, but it's there. It's
Yeah.
absolutely there.
Yeah. I mean, this is where I feel like anything can be used in activism. Any kind of skill set, really, like outside of what we would consider artistic skill sets, right? Um, Cooking, which I do think is artistic, can be part of activism.
Right.
I I mean, one of the questions we had talked about, which we can kind of go ahead and I think put out there to our audiences too, is just like what are some skill sets that could be used in activism that maybe you wouldn't think of right away. And it can make your activism more interesting and more creative. And so I'm thinking of like, for example, this other term, craftivism. I'm not sure if Sarah Corbett actually coined that term, but she's the one who's really known online as like the craftivist if you look up craftivism. And with her uh organization Craftivist Collective. Sorry, I had to look it up there for a second. Yeah, her organization Craftivist Collective. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're looking at ways and means of using crafts in this kind of more subtle and gentle way. Like they're looking at they I think they actually used the word gentle in talking about their activism. It's more gentle activism, not like I guess in your face activism. So,
Mm.
um which I mean, I think both can be useful, but the way I had learned about her work was in one of her TED Talks from like, might even be a decade ago. It's kind of old at this point, where we'll put the link down in the show notes, but where she basically was sending these scarves to this company, to this organization. And in the scarves, they had different messages written into it and knitted into it to inspire this company to change its policies. So I'll just let you all go to the TED Talk to go into that, because I will butcher it if I try to summarize what that was. That was so long ago when I watched that TED Talk. But I was like, oh, okay, because I knew of artivism, and I'm like, oh, here's this other thing, craftivism. And I'm like, okay, I guess really anything can be a part of activism, really, at this point. So with textiles, this is, I mentioned at the start of the show, this is something I don't really have a lot of experience in. I am, again, more of a performing artist, not a visual artist, something I'm trying to get a little bit more into. But with textiles, the first thing that comes to my mind is quilting. And I say it like a question mark, quilting, because I now live in Southern Virginia, where there's a lot of quilting in this area. You see a lot of quilts. But even if it might not be overtly Confederate, a lot of these quilts I see feel very definitely America, but sometimes they seem like, I mean, I'm looking at symbols and I'm like, this looks like a Confederate symbol to me. And I'm like, maybe I'm just so programmed to think that. And again, I mentioned in one of our last episodes, we recently had Confederate Heritage Month during April. I thought it
Hmm.
was Earth Month, but apparently in Virginia, it is Confederate Heritage Month. So I was like, maybe this is why I see the Confederate flag everywhere. And I do literally see it actually everywhere. Like people actually have it hanging. I shouldn't say hanging, but like they have it up in front of their house. They have their Confederate flags up in front of their house. It's like, okay. So I I was like, where are the black quilts? Where are the quilts by black women? And so this was something I started researching to get ready for this episode of like, where do I find those? Because I in this area I don't see it. Now, if I go to Richmond, I will see more there. But in this area of like Lynchburg, I am not seeing it a lot. But I also might not be going to the right spaces. So if anyone in this area is like, Danny, dude, why have you not gone here? Please like share with me. I am still very much learning this area. But yeah, I have been finding some really cool, not just galleries and not just museums, but just other community spaces online. I've been learning about other community spaces throughout the South where you can see these amazing quilts by these Black female artists and some men as well. But primarily what I've been finding is from Black female artists. So that's been really cool. Like looking at all these pictures online, I kind of was thinking like, ooh, road trip. Hmm.
Do you have any names of those artists? And I know oftentimes with quilting, folks may not necessarily be artists. They are quilters, and this is what they do.
Well, okay. So
But they are artists in our eyes,
yeah,
but they don't
okay,
call themselves
exactly.
artists.
Yes. And but you do bring up something too that I'd like to touch on. You brought this up earlier, and so I'm going to bounce around here for a second. But to touch on that, you said earlier, this is how I'm of service to the community. You weren't like necessarily speaking for Nawili, but like this idea of this is what I do. That I quilt, for example, or I braid. You know, this is the skill that I have to give, and so I'm going to somehow use it in my activism and my spirituality and all my facets. But I've been noticing this trend though in my research about quilting. I've been noticing a lot of artists saying this very similar idea of like, this was the skill set that I had, so I was going to use it. And that's really cool to me because, like, for example, when looking at Navajo quilts and learning about how these children in these boarding schools were basically forced to learn how to quilt. And then this was the skill set that they had to make money. They were like, okay, like I guess this is how I'm going to make money. I'm going to sell these these quilts in order to survive because this is a skill set that this boarding school gave me, even though this is not a skill set passed down to me from my family. But then, I've been finding these cool artists who, in particular, I'm really, really drawn to, let me make sure I say Susan's name correctly. Bring it up here. Susan Hudson. And she is actually an NEA National Heritage Fellow. So shout out to NEA. But, I found it really interesting that she had this transformation, this turning point in her story as a quilter, where she suddenly realized, like, I can explore quilting by incorporating some actual methods from my family, other sewing methods and other textile techniques into this what we would consider Western traditional quilting, right? And actually pulling in more images that are representative of these histories of my people that are being lost. I say my people, her people that are being lost, right? So I found that really, really interesting of like how other people have been playing with quilting as the it's activism on so many different levels, right? But to go back to what you were saying about some Black artists to name specifically, the the one that I started going like really deep into, if I can find this one as well, is
We'll definitely include these in the show notes
yeah,
as well,
yeah.
these names.
Um, Give me a second to find the link here, but I found an article through the Smithsonian and it had so many different artists. So I kind of went on a rabbit hole on all these different artists. So give me a second to find that link here.
Well, while you are finding that link and some names that we can share with our audience, thinking about that idea of, well, the question of, are all quilts political, right?
Mm,
And I think it's extremely important, especially since we're talking about museums, especially since you just brought up the NEA, the National Endowment for
mm-hmm,
the Arts. Um, it's important to understand, as I believe you mentioned, how stories, histories of different peoples, different cultures are woven into these quilts. It's a way of passing down the information, right? So
mm-hmm.
now we have this problem where in museums, certain exhibitions are being taken away, certain
Yeah.
exhibitions are being closed down. So relating it to how some quilters are saying, I'm a quilter, this is a skill, right? This is the skill set I have. I'm not necessarily an artist, but I quilt. The importance of people who we see as artists who are quilters and having this tradition passed down, keeping these items within families.
Mm-hmm.
The importance is that if it goes into an institution, it may be put into the collection in the basement. It may not be shown. Or if, we come into a place right now where we are within our history with in the United States of America and other countries around the world where we have executive leaders who completely disregard the importance of history, say that the history is not true, say that the history is discriminatory. It's important to have this at our hands, in our homes, accessible through individuals as opposed to these institutions where these things might be lost or might be taken or
Mm-hmm.
might be thrown into the background. It's important to have these, right? And also
Mm-hmm.
in the comments, what was being said or was said from one of our audience members is, yes, this is probably more of a reason for us to quilt for the people, right?
Yeah.
Not as a reaction, but a response, which I
Ooh,
think,
what do you mean
which I,
by that?
well, I would have to ask
What do you mean
our,
by that
our
person?
audience member,
Not
our
not
audience
a
member, right?
response, not a reaction. Let me think about that.
And also, Naweeli's putting in the chat some textile artists, Black women, Faith Ringgold, Bisa Butler, um,
Oh,
Ramses. Um, so I think what I believe this is being Special NYC Advocate of Choice Incorporated is the person that made this comment, and I believe this person's name is Hazel. Hi, Hazel. Um, but I think what I get from that is that reaction is reactionary, right? It's a way that is something that's visceral that you're not really thinking about. A response is you are considering
Okay.
how you are approaching or reacting
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
something. You're
Hmm.
considering the reaction. So what would the appropriate response be? So
Hmm.
so let's say in the time right now of authoritarianism and complete just evil within the executive branch of the United States of America, someone can create a quilt that is documenting what's happening
Hmm.
and how the people can respond. And someone can use that as a way of healing, right?
Hmm.
Like with
Hmm.
yoga, like with braiding, and as a way to recognize how to do the work that they want to do for justice or within justice. It's just a thought.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just what I'm taking from that the comment in the chat.
Yeah, okay. I see where you're going now, or where this is going. And I think you articulated that better than I did. But yes, I think it's what's interesting too to me is like, again, looking back to Susan Hudson and what she's doing. It's like it's so cool to me that using this Western traditional quilting method, but then, again, I think like I'm gonna punk it. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna do it the way I was told to do it. That is activism right there. There's that level, right? And then, incorporating these other techniques and methods that of sewing and using textiles in her Navajo ancestry, that using that's part of that activism, right? And then it's so important preserving these histories. Like some of her quilts, they're hard to look at. They're
Mm,
traumatic. It's
mm,
like children being taken from their families and putting into these boarding schools. That's
wow.
what one of the images of her quilts are.
Mm,
And it's but that's what she says too in this documentary that the I'm pretty sure the NEA did this documentary, which we'll put the documentary, it's a short little video. We'll put that in the show notes. But I love that she says it's like, I'm gonna put it in your face. You have to look at it. I'm gonna make you look at it. I'm gonna make all these eyes look at it. And that was like, okay, here's the interesting thing about textiles is like, a painting, you put that on your wall and it usually stays on your wall. But when I'm thinking textiles in activism, I'm often thinking of like people wearing capes, people wearing quilts, like people using these huge flags and these different fabrics, marching with these different fabrics, not just posters, right? These banners, for example. And I'm definitely thinking still along the lines of quilting because a lot of times these banners, these capes, they're made from recycled fabrics the way, that was one thing I didn't really think about with quilting because again, not a seamstress, don't really know anything about sewing, but that a lot of these, a lot of quilters are using recycled materials. They're using scraps of jeans, they're using scraps of anything really. And that's when I guess I kind of knew this, like that, like slaves, for example, they're going to make quilts from whatever they can get access to in order to have a
enslaved
blanket.
people.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like I knew these things, but I didn't really think in depth about them before today. But that is the cool
I
thing
feel you.
about the function of textiles is that you can use it in different functions, not just like a painting on the wall. Like a quilt can go on a wall. It's a beautiful piece of art, right? But
It's functional art. It's functional art, right?
yeah, yeah.
Is that another phrase we can use for it? And you know what, Danny? I actually want to research this more. I am curious, is quilting a Western tradition? Because
Well,
yes,
no,
like you said at the very beginning,
no,
we
it's
are learning.
let
I don't know too much about
me
textiles. It's not my specific arena.
let me correct myself. I'm talking about like how Navajo children in a boarding school were learning what quilting was like in Western culture. They were learning that kind of tradition. Not, again,
Okay,
I think quilting
okay,
also,
gotcha.
and this is something I'm learning of like how broad this term quilting is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, even like it- I in my research found this random video of this lady who was trying to insist, of course, this white lady was trying to insist that braiding came from Vikings, and I'm like, oh, I already know that can't be right. Like, there's just no way. Like, I just so it's like okay, like maybe let's look at where these terms originated, like where these words, in etymology, where they started, but like, so yeah, I think like
Exactly.
quilting, like, whatever it might have been called before it was called quilting, like, yeah, no, I don't think that is, I'm not trying to say that is a European thing at all. It was not made by the
I mean,
Vikings.
this is definitely this is why we have to say these things and research these things as best as we can. And talking about history, we have to research in all realms. And when I say all realms, not just within a particular tradition, like the Western tradition, right? You and I, we look at traditions from around the world, right? And this, I
Right, right.
think this is something that has to be said because this plays into how people are taking opinions as facts, right?
Yeah,
As
yeah.
opposed to doing the research on their own. I understand time, right? Time is precious. Everyone doesn't have time to be a researcher. But if you just take a moment to learn something outside of what you're being fed from the same source, it can broaden your horizon. It can help you understand something with more depth, And I am thinking about this so much because of what is happening with misinformation and disinformation
Hmm,
so much
hmm,
within this age of the Anthropocene. Like
hmm.
I'm, I am very much just concerned. And so I'm happy that we're here to pose these questions and ask, okay, where did this come from? And then I'm also thinking about the idea of ownership. If we, and this is totally, again, like we go with the flow. If we look at ownership, right, and think about land and how this land here in the United States, the construct of ownership of land has created all of these problems is obviously racist, right? Obviously classist. When we think of ownership of things like that woman talking about, oh, braiding came from the Vikings. I do think like, man, what if we just said, hey, let's recognize where this first happened and how it's expanded throughout the world without using the term ownership. It's something that I think about a lot
Mm.
because
Mm.
it's divisive. Ownership is divisive in so many ways. I think
Hmm.
with certain things like I, my body is mine, right? That's one thing. But when it comes to ideas, practices, cultural practices, what if we explore the idea of ownership and say and think, well, I think it's more so about acknowledgement, right? Of where these things originated.
Hmm, hmm.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to articulate this thought because it's something that I think about in my mind, in my head, and I'm just like, how
Hmm.
can we move past this way of thinking, and will that help us in evolving as humans and
Hmm.
getting out of wars? Right?
Hmm.
Like man, that's, yeah, it's
Yeah. I mean, it it kind of reminds me too of like I feel now I'm feeling extra bad because it's like I didn't, I keep saying Lynchburg and not acknowledging I'm on Monacan land, right? And th that acknowledgement is really important,
I, mm,
and it's something I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure out how to decolonize my whole brain. Like, and yeah, why is ownership so freaking important? Um
that's a we can leave that on the table,
I'll
right?
try
We can
to,
leave that on the
yeah,
table because I
yeah,
know
okay.
that's
Yeah,
going into
yeah,
another arena, which obviously we know
right.
this is all
I mean, can
connected,
we live? I
right?
was thinking like can we let go of that in a capitalist society? I don't know. Like all the
Ugh,
things my brain needs to unlearn.
yeah, right.
But
It's
I will say I found that NEA article, not NEA, sorry, that National National Gallery of Art article, and
okay.
the artist in particular who I was, going down a rabbit hole with was Mary Lee Bendoff, and then that led me down to learning more um about Gee's Bend, and that's where I was like, ooh, wouldn't that be a fun road trip down to here? And I actually can I just say real quick, Gee's Bend, I'm gonna quote from this article, which we'll put down in the show notes. Gee's Bend is named for Joseph Gee, a North Carolina entrepreneur who bought land in Alabama. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. The plantation housed 17 enslaved people who planted cotton. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Later on, it was sold to Mark Petway. Petway was a cruel man who made his enslaved people, walk from North Carolina to Alabama. And now on Petway's property, some of Gee's enslaved people were forced to adopt his last name, a name many Gee's Bend residents still carry 5 generations on. So if you go to Gee's Bend, their website, there's so many artists. There's well over 100 artists on their page, and you can see several Bendoffs, Ella Bendoff, Annie Bendoff, Louisiana Bendoff, and then all these other families there. And these quilts are so beautiful. And to me, not like any of the kind of quilts I see in this area. Um, Sorry, Zoom is popping things up at me. Are you still there? Did I lose you? I didn't lose you, right? Because my internet at this office sucks.
I am so still here.
Okay,
Yes.
good. But yeah, I'll put that in the show notes as well. But it's, I mean, to me, I can see some of the influences from West Africa and Kenya. Those are the cultures I'm more familiar with. So there's certain symbology and color schemes where I'm like, oh my God, okay, now I see, now I see. But there's so much here, and it's really interesting too, again, how were using different scraps of fabric, different materials, and yeah, it's something I really would like to learn more about, and where all these quilts are, because there's only so many now in on display in Gee's Bend, and
Hmm.
there's several all over the world apparently. But it'd be kind of fun to map out where they all are.
Yeah. A quilt tour. That would be
That's what I'm
great.
saying. Wouldn't that be fun? That'd be so fun. I
That
know
would
my
be
mom would be
awesome.
into
Awesome.
it.
Love it. And really directly or tying it back to hair, with Nawili G being a master braider and the yarning of hair. This is what I really want her to,
Hmm, hmm,
to talk about too, like go into depth about yarning the hair and thinking about that as like a sort of quilt, like,
hmm,
the on your hair, like, your head, you are wearing this work of art
hmm,
that is providing you with this energy of love and connection and uniqueness. And what does that, just talking about what does that signify and what people have said about having their hair um, done with yarn, and what types of works, that or what that feels like, as a master braider, creating these sort of quilts, on people's head. You know what
Hmm.
I mean?
Hmm.
I know Nawili has done my hair like that, and it was it just I don't know, it just made me feel different. It made me feel like I was in the stars again, like this
Yeah.
cosmic connection. It made me feel like I am the spirit that I am, right?
Hmm.
I and this body that I'm using is the body that I'm using, that I was provided to walk this earth with. But I felt more of a connection to my spiritual self.
Yeah.
It was just it was just really interesting. Or just it just it just feels like you are connecting to something that was disconnected from you, and you are
Mm.
reaching back like Sankofa, and you are bringing, let's say, that yarn or that textile, bringing it to you and quilting yourself within this story, this history
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
being made.
Ooh,
You know
ooh,
what I mean? Like
ooh, yeah.
it feels good. It
Yeah.
feels good. If that makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
trying doing
Yeah,
my
no,
best to
that I love
articulate
this
that.
idea of like I'm not only going to preserve history in these quilts and make you look at it, but it's like I'm gonna put it into my body and into my hair and make you look at it. It's like, yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but I'm like, okay, yeah, like people will tattoo the craziest protest messages on their bodies, like now I'm thinking like how you put that in your hair and not just on your clothes. Like you can literally put it on your body and like it's more, more permanent. I know it's not maybe necessarily permanent. You can also get rid of a tattoo if you really want to. But
Yeah.
um
Yeah, you can.
but yeah, okay. That's cool. I didn't really think of that
Hmm.
layer too.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Wow, this is so funny. Just the places we go.
Yeah, I
The
didn't know what
places
to
you
this
go.
episode. I didn't know what was gonna happen. Especially, I didn't even know. I was like, it's the show's gonna go on, but I really wasn't sure. Like, am I gonna get internet today? Is it gonna happen? I think now's a
I'm
good time
glad it all
though.
worked out.
Yeah, I think now's a good time to do our call to action. What do you
Yep,
think?
I'm going to put that in the chat right now. Oh, why does it look like that? Oh, it's because too many words. Let me take that out of there.
Do you want me to
Okay, I'm
read
just gonna
it?
put the second half, yes, as well, please.
So our call to action, this is Jan and I are going to try to do this too, is we're asking you all to go to a museum, gallery, or maybe even a textile shop, another kind of community space where you might find textiles, and discover a new piece of work and examine it through this artivism lens. Ask yourself, when was this made? Who made this? Why did they make it? How do you feel, think, and relate to this work? And then share with us your thoughts.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. I'm not sure which museum or gallery I am going to go to. Uh, talk about textile shops. I think
Oh,
Joanne's fabrics are like going out of business or
yeah.
something,
We had one here and I'm so sad, but I got the most amazing tiger print on sale.
right? You and
All
your
the,
tiger prints.
oh my gosh, everything I own now. If I could sit down and learn how to sew, I'm gonna just look like a tiger every day.
I don't know which one I'm gonna go to. I also was thinking about the question we posed in the chat a little earlier, about what textiles you have in your home.
Oh
And
yeah.
I have a few mud cloth pieces. So when I go and do this call to action to a museum or a gallery, I'm going to see if I can find any mud cloth pieces here
Mm,
where I am in the VT.
yeah.
Um, Sit there for a couple of minutes and, just look at it. And that's the thing, y'all. When you do go, just take your time.
Yeah.
Go when you have some time so you can sit and you can look at the work. And while you're there, I think consider all that we talked about today when it comes to quilting the connection to African hair braiding, as well as yoga. Maybe you can sit in a yoga position in the gallery.
Mm.
In the museum, you know what I'm saying? Like just do a web search of yoga positions and see which one works well for you, and maybe incorporate that into your exploration, right?
Mhm.
Um, on that day. I'm going to do this. I hope I
Yeah.
can find a place. Me and my
I'm
child.
I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to find something local. I mean, I do want to do this road trip. I always am looking for an excuse to do a road trip though. But I do want to find there's some very interesting Black history here in Lynchburg. And like there's got to be a place that I don't know that I want to find where I can find a textile piece or a quilt. I know they're doing a lot of work um, near our Diamond Hill neighborhood to preserve Black history. And actually, there might be something else too that I can share later for those local audience members. But yeah, I'm like, I gotta look deeper into that because there's got to be somewhere like in Diamond Hill neighborhood or somewhere here where I can find a quilt, maybe a modern one, maybe, an old one. I don't know.
Yeah. And now we least shared in chat, relax yourself, inhale, then exhale. And I think this is in relation to when we go and into the spaces that we will
Hmm.
explore
Hmm.
and do this particular, take on this particular prompt. Um, yeah, I have lots of questions, and I'm definitely going to be doing a bit more research on textiles and yoga. And I'm just looking forward to having the conversation with Nawili about the, um, I want to use the Kimberly Crenshaw coin term,
Mm.
intersectionality
Hmm.
of these practices, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And something else, Danny, I was thinking actually, and I didn't get a chance to share it with you. I feel like when we do these part one episodes,
Hmm.
maybe we can take a moment to address what's going on in today's news, like, currently, because I was
Mm.
having a conversation the other day with someone about how we go about our days, go about our lives, and we have to because we're alive, right? We have to live our lives, but we go about our daily routines knowing that all of these bad things are going on in the world, genocide, atrocities of different sorts. And we have this show to create the space to talk about what people are doing in relation to how, or in response to, what's going on in the world, what's going on in communities, etc. But I feel like maybe, we can try to acknowledge what's happening in the day. So, for example, earlier when we were talking about the NEA grant to the indigenous quilter, I believe, right?
Yeah. Susan
And
Hudson.
yeah, bringing up what you shared with me the other day, the funding, right? That
Oh,
was
yeah.
taken away. Stuff like that is what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. Like, um, pointing that out, and as one of our past guests said, naming the people who are
Mm.
doing that, the people who are uplifting oppression, right?
Mm.
And obviously we know who's doing this with the NEA funding.
Hmm.
But we can also, say the name, the executive branch of the United States of America and cronies taking away funding from programs
Yeah.
that provide the necessary cash to create
Hmm.
these sort of, you know, histories, quilting,
Hmm.
textiles, to spread this information and have people be aware of the facts. So that's something that I just wanted to put out there, and I wanted to say it to our audience as well, just so y'all know, we are acknowledging what's going on, and we both do this work so that we can figure out different ways to approach how to respond.
Yeah, which that, let me make sure I say this correctly too. But yeah, on our website, on our Instagram, I should say, we had, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, we had made a post about the Native Coalition launching an online hub to track and respond to federal cuts. So I did save that to our resources highlights on our Instagram. And yeah, it's also, it's not just even federal cuts, it's also like tariffs and like just, business for a lot of indigenous businesses and trade is really, really affected right now. And it's these cuts, it's not just cuts to artists, like the what's happening with the libraries too. It's like, yeah, we don't care about not just preserving indigenous history, but also there's so much that we still don't know, that we're still researching, that we're still trying to document, right? And wrongs that will never be righted, wrongs that, well, not in this administration, that's for sure. But also can never be completely righted, right? So it's, yeah, I'm kind of babbling now because I know we're at time and there's just so much more we could go into this. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm laughing. It's not
yeah.
funny. This is not a funny topic, but I'm doing that awkward like laugh because yeah, this is there. I mean, this we can figure out how to do this, but yeah, acknowledging what's going on without spending another hour doing it.
And figuring out, this is the thing, what are the ways in which, and we've talked about this, and like I said recently, just thinking about some and what he's said and things we've talked about, just about ways in which, new ways in which we can address these injustices.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely it obviously always will include the collective power and understanding how strong that is when we come together for justice, not only for ourselves, but for all beings and for the earth, right? So just keeping that in mind as we go out and we live our day-to-day lives and we explore these museums and galleries and textile shops and think
Mm-hmm.
about African hair braiding and yoga, just keeping those all in mind, and as well as the healing that we've brought up, that yoga helps us accomplish, right? Um, so yeah, yeah, we are at our time, right? We are at our time.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
before we go, we always like to remind our listeners that this podcast is funded by the two of your lady lovely artivist hosts, the two of us, and your donations. So please help us keep our podcast going by making a donation through our PayPal link in the show notes below. And if you haven't already, you better subscribe. You better like every video and share every video and help us out. That's another thing Jan and I have been talking about is like, how do we want to exist in the world of social media? Like, we're still figuring it out. Oh gosh, yeah. So when other people can promote us and we don't need to use Chat GBT and bots and whatever, like, wow. Wow, do we appreciate it? Wow.
yeah. And also, what about part two?
Part two. Part two is going to be in 2 weeks with the Nawili. So excited. It's going to be on May 31st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's funny, I'm looking at my phone with that date, and I forgot too, that weekend, I actually was invited to work at a powwow. So maybe I'll find some cool
Hmm.
textiles too that weekend to talk about.
Oh,
Yeah.
that'd be
It'll unfortunately
awesome.
be after that episode with Nawili, but like do the
Oh,
social media thing and do some videos and stuff, but that'll be cool. That same
yeah.
weekend, I'll be
Oh,
going
yeah.
to a
Yeah,
local
that'll be good.
powwow here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Dang, that's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, please,
I
please.
know. I feel
I'm going to be there, so
very honored
stream
to
live
be
or something. I don't
invited.
know.
Yeah, we'll see. I'll be honest, this is my first time going to one like this, so we'll see. I don't know how,
Yeah,
I'm very sensitive to that, I don't like just going up and shoving cameras in people's faces, right? So
yeah,
we'll
yeah,
see. But hopefully
yeah,
I can talk to some textile makers there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm excited to see, what pictures you do get of textiles and, video maybe of what's going on. It'll be nice to, even if
Yeah.
it's just personally, we're like, yeah, this is
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
did. So, but yes, please, like Danny said, part two of the Fabric and Crowns collection, Saturday, May 31st at 1 p.m. live, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Um, Again, subscribe, like, share. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in today. So, peace.